Rather than blaming the child's home background, as cultural deprivation theory does, labelling shows how teachers' stereotypes can be a cause of failure. However, there's a danger of seeing these as simply the product of individual teachers' prejudices rather than of racism in wider society. Factors outside the classroom or individual schools, such as the influence of role models in the family and media, also play a part, as may government and school educational policies. For example, although Sewell emphasises that there are four responses to teacher labelling within the school, Sewell also acknowledges the role of home and society. Sewell argued, indeed, that the rebels brought black street culture into the school. Teachers sometimes interpreted this as a challenge to their authority when none was intended. For example, many of the rebels came to school with patterns in their hair, and this was banned, despite the fact that white students were allowed to wear ponytails. So although the teachers were racist, there was also an element of the black masculinity that was brought in from the street. So Sewell's study includes a range of factors. He looks at the racist education system, the impact of the peer group, the media-inspired gangster role models, and also the impact of lone parent families. He argues a high proportion of African Caribbean boys are raised in lone parent families, and this makes black boys more vulnerable to peer group pressure. Young men are drawn into gangs, which emphasize an aggressive, macho form of masculinity. Members demand respect, reject authority figures such as teachers and police, and focus on up-to-the-minute street fashion and music. This form of black masculinity is reflected and reinforced by the media, with gangster rap and hip-hop fashions and news reports emphasizing black street crime and gun culture. This subculture of black masculinity provides a comfort zone for many African Caribbean young men. This alone does not cause underachievement, but the school's reaction to this black masculinity then forces them to underachieve. I also argue that the policy of publishing league tables creates a economy. The next factor that we will look at is the ethnocentric curriculum. The term ethnocentric describes an attitude that gives priority to the culture or viewpoint of one particular ethnic group, whilst disregarding others. So if we have an ethnocentric curriculum, the curriculum concentrates on white culture and disregards other ethnic minorities' cultures. Troyner and Williams described the curriculum in British schools as ethnocentric because it gives priority to white culture and the English language. Miriam David describes the national curriculum as specifically British curriculum that teaches the culture of the host community, whilst largely ignoring non-European languages, literature and music. Stephen Bull criticises the national curriculum for ignoring cultural and ethnic diversity and for promoting an attitude of Little Englandism. For example, the history curriculum tries to recreate a mythical age of empire and past glories while ignoring the history of black and Asian people. School subjects in the hidden curriculum concentrate on white British society and culture. Role models are white. History is based on Western culture. The black history that is covered in books looks at the degrading aspects of the slave trade. Black history, art, literature, and culture are often absent from the curriculum. This contributes to the low self-esteem of black children. The school curriculum is more attractive to some ethnic groups than others. Bourdieu argues the education system is not neutral because the culture of school is white culture. Ethnic minority groups lack cultural capital and consequently have less opportunity to attain high success in later life. Cord argues that the content of education ignores black people. Reading books often contain only white people. When blacks do feature, they are shown in subservient roles. Heroes in history are white. White culture and lives are studied in all areas of the curriculum. Even the words white and black have different connotations, white being good and black being evil. This has important consequences for the child. Black children develop an inferiority complex and low expectations in life. Teachers expect black students to fail. They are more likely to be placed in lower streams and bands, and this produces a self-fulfilling prophecy which they live up to once they have been labelled. However, there have been many criticisms of the ethnocentric curriculum, and it's argued that Cord, who was writing in the 1970s, and other authors are now out of date because there have been many developments that have led to an ever-increasing diverse curriculum. For example, there have been many educational policies which have aimed to tackle the narrow roles that black people are shown in. Black people are now studied in the American Civil Rights Movement, for example. There might be black authors studied in English literature. And Ofsted now places a very real emphasis on equality and diversity, which is one of the four main ways that schools and colleges are assessed. In order to show equality and diversity, schools and colleges have to promote role models from other ethnic minorities. Another key criticism is that the ethnocentric curriculum cannot fully explain underachievement, because Indian and Chinese pupils do well in education, yet their cultures are studied even less than black culture. Another argument that has been put forward is that it's not individual teacher racism that is the cause of underachievement, but it is in actual fact institutional racism. It is argued that the whole school is institutionally racist as an organisation. Troiner and Williams argue that explanations of ethnic differences should look at how schools and colleges routinely discriminate against ethnic minorities. They argue that the ethnocentric curriculum is a prime example of institutional racism. They see the meagre provision for teaching Asian languages as institutional racism because it is an example of racial bias being built into the everyday workings of schools and colleges. Studies of school governing bodies provide further examples of institutional racism. Richard Hatcher found that they gave low priority to race issues and failed to deal with pupils' racist behaviour. In the schools he studied, there were no formal channels of communication between school governors and ethnic minority parents. This meant, for example, that nothing was done about parents' concerns over lack of language support. These examples show that institutional racism may create an environment in which ethnic minority pupils are routinely disadvantaged by a system that disregards their needs. Remember that institutional racism is unintentional racism and is created as a side effect. Finally, we will look at the impact of marketisation and selection policies. David Gilbourne argues that marketisation has given schools greater scope to select pupils, and this puts some ethnic minority pupils at a disadvantage. Gilbert and Udall studied 2 London comprehensive schools over a 2-year period using lesson observations, analysis of documents, and interviews with pupils and teachers. The study was based on pupils in Key Stage 4 with a focus on GCSEs. In Clough School, 16% of black pupils but 35% of white pupils achieve 5 or more higher grade passes at GCSE. In Taylor School, 47% of white pupils and 24% of black pupils achieved this standard. In both schools, approximately twice as many white as black pupils were succeeding in terms of this measure. Gilbert and Udall point out that it is often seen as particularly important that pupils get a C or above in maths, English and a science subject. In Taylor School, no black pupils managed to achieve this, whereas 37% of white pupils did. In Clough School, only 4% of black pupils managed it compared to 18% of white pupils. Gilbert and Udall believe the move back towards selection in education, the emphasis on pupils achieving 5 or more higher grade GCSEs, and the introduction of different tiers in GCSE have all contributed to the disadvantages of black and working class pupils. They argue that these changes have produced a system of educational triage in which education is rationed. As you already know, triage refers to the medical practice used, for example, in the event of a disaster, whereby patients are prioritised. The emphasis is on helping students who have a chance of getting 5 or more GCSEs at C or above, whilst those who are certain to succeed are less of a priority. The ones who are certain to succeed are the walking wounded, they are left alone. The ones who are not certain to succeed are those in need of medical attention. In practice, this leads to black pupils being held back. Many black pupils are seen as having no chance of success and are seen as the lowest priority. Gilbert and Udall found that the expectations held of black pupils were comparatively low, and they were systematically denied access to the sets, groups and exams which would give them the best chance of success. The Commission for Racial Equality, in their report, notes that racism in schools admissions procedures means that ethnic minority children are more likely to end up in unpopular schools. The report identifies the following reasons: reports from primary schools that stereotype minority pupils, racist bias in interviews for school places, lack of information and application forms in minority language, and ethnic minority parents are often unaware of how the waiting list system works and the importance of deadlines. School selection policies are not the only cause of segregation. It can also be the result of an active choice by parents. For example, ethnic minority parents may send students to faith schools, for example. To fully understand the relationship between ethnicity and achievements, we need to look at how ethnicity interacts with gender and class. Examining black children's achievements, sociologists tend to look at culture and ethnicity, but rarely at class. By contrast, when they examine white children's achievement, the focus is on their class rather than their culture and ethnicity. We need to look at those things for every child. This is why ethnicity is a complicated area to look at. Connolly's study, Mackengale's study, Fuller's study, Mertz's study and Gilbert's study also all look at how gender, ethnicity and class intersect, and this is a key evaluation point for any essay on ethnicity.